everyone, thanks for being here for my presentation today. I'm Yuqi, a third-year PhD student from UWA, founded by CRC for honeybee products. The topic of my presentation today is what does landscape architecture bring to bees? Aiming to share a landscape architect's perspective in designing bee-friendly gardens and landscapes. This presentation is shaped and based on the three pillars of landscape architecture: planning, design, and management. Literature review, case studies, and some results from my semi-structured in-depth interview are the main sources. So what is our landscape architecture? Here is a definition from Landscape Dictionary. Landscape architecture is the art and science of the design and integration of the natural and man-made elements of the earth, with the materials of which earth, water, vegetation, and built environments. The landscape architecture is responsible for making places for a variety of uses and habitation. Landscape projects are not limited to private gardens or public parks. We have community gardens, institutional gardens, streetscapes, and revegetation projects, including brownfield projects. Institutional green spaces includes green spaces in hospitals, schools, and universities. Botanic gardens are also considered as institutional green spaces. There's no uniform formula when seeking bee-friendly design solutions. It's necessary to conceive and design according to physical and environmental conditions and the types of the specific project, because different project types are largely varied in their locations, sizes, environmental conditions, target visitors, main functions. Therefore, their focuses are quite different. For example, between between streetscapes and private gardens, the proportion of hard and soft surfaces and the exotic and native plant choices are very different. Let's take a look at the botanic garden as an example. Among all active pursuits of modern botanic gardens, plant display, education, research, and collection are the main functions. So bee-friendly solutions must be first carried out on the premise of satisfying these functions. I'm sure all of you must have known this part more than I do. Here's a brief introduction of the bee and flowering plants in Australia, just to have an overview. Western Australia has a diverse bee species and reliable foraging resources. European honeybees were introduced to Australia in the 19th century. They're responsible for most of the honey production. At present, there are around 30,000 European honeybee hives in Western Australia, mostly managed by beekeepers, along with thousands of feral bee colonies living in trees and other nesting sites. Also, Western Australia is home to over 800 native bee species. They do not produce for human, but they pollinate a much wider range of plant species and thus are the most dominant and efficient pollinators in natural ecosystems, contributing to the maintenance of biological diversity. Both native bees and honeybees rely mostly on floristic resources in a range of habitats, from urban landscapes to natural environments. But bee communities are experiencing loss of habitats, including nesting places and lack of foraging resources due to urbanization and the impact of climate change. For example, native plant communities disappear very fast and replaced by novel planted ecosystems in urban environments. All of this guide us to consider how to create a unique urban green infrastructure that has ecological values and can contribute to the creation of sustainable urban environment, not only to human beings, but also to urban living creatures. Based on literature review, we identified three major connections between bees and landscapes. The planning plan, including plant selection, influence the floral richness. Increased floral diversity can mitigate potential negative effects of urbanization, and visitation frequency of bees may even increase in dense populated regions. Plant selection also affect the canopy covers. Bees prefer flowers that are in full sun. However, considering plant health, the planting should rely on and match each plant species' own physiological characters for sun exposure. Also, canopies are preferred for humans to provide shade in green spaces. Bees, plant, and people's needs have to be very well balanced and considered in the design procedure. Due to urbanization, imperious landscape size are increasing, which are largely affecting the size and quality of urban bee habitats. Landscape architecture can provide a systematic framework to tackle these problems based on its three pillars: planning, design, and management. In terms of planning, a reasonable and comprehensive planning plan can help balance the size of hardscape and softscape to accommodate both needs for human and for urban life, including bees. By adding corridors, it can help increase the habitat connectivity between green patches to mitigate habitat fragmentation. From the design perspective, we have three main aspects to work on for a bee-friendly design, which are plant selection, plant schemes, and plant elements and artistic features. By doing plant selection, we need to understand the definition of biodiversity in Australia. There are actually two natures in Australia, the design nature and native nature. The design nature is represented by public parks and gardens, which used different design styles based on exotic species. Native nature refers to natural indigenous ecosystems. In Australia, the perception of urban biodiversity is more related to native biodiversity. Preserving biodiversity refers to the conservation of native species. The use of native species is the priority in landscape plant selection. Here you can see how it's different between the native remnant vegetation and the design landscape in UWA campus. But does this mean that exotic plants are not used, should not be used or valued in landscape? The answer is no. I've done interviews with 14 Perth-based landscape architects. Here are the answers to two of my interview questions. 13 out of 14 interviewees agreed to grow exotic plants in a bee-friendly botanic garden and consider them as a part of urban biodiversity. I've concluded their arguments here. The first one is that some exotic plants to Western Australia are actually native to European honeybees. A proper area growing with exotic plants can attract some honeybees, further mitigate the competition on native plants with native bee species. The second argument is, as a commitment to urban biodiversity, the bee-friendly botanic garden should have both native and exotic collections. And the third one is, although native bees prefer native plants, observed by some landscape architects, they were foraging on exotic plants based on their observations. So based on this, I would suggest to prioritizing the growth of native plant species, but exotic plants can be used in a less proportion. Here are some cases, bee-friendly cases in some botanic gardens around the world. This is the bee spotter in Cambridge University Botanic Gardens. Their main bee-friendly strategy is the plant color scheme because bees are very sensitive to the ultraviolet colors. Plants with purple flowers, colors like purple, blue, white, they are good choices to be planted in the gardens. And this is the Botanic Buzzlight in Cornell Botanic Garden, initiated by students. It's a flowering pathway to help pollinating insects navigate fragmented green spaces. The aim is to connect the habitat patches within gardens. Uh, Bee Garden is in the National Botanic Gardens of Wales has 8 hives and create a space combining education, research, and ecology together. Research has been done on the floral preferences of both honeybees and wild pollinators. The hive, this is the hive in Royal Botanic Gardens Kew in London. It's an architectural installation with both educational and recreational functions combining with science. It aims to highlight the important pollination roles of honeybees by providing immersive sound and visual experience. It locates in the center of a wildflower meadow and links to a real beehive in the gardens. And it contains nearly 1,000 LED lights, which flicker based on the wings flapping and the buzzing of the bees. It creates conservation between visitors and the bees. Bee hotels have become the most common bee-friendly features, not only in botanic gardens, but also in public parks and private gardens. Here are the 3 photos taken in Oslo Botanic Garden, in the Canberra Australian National Botanic Gardens, and in Paris. They provide nesting places for honeybees and other insect pollinators. The hotel's timber hollows and separate rooms create fitting habitats for native bees to establish multiple hives. Um, Bee hotels have both roles of conservation and education by educating and raising public awareness of the roles native bees playing in a healthy ecosystem. The last one is management. This part is more suitable to the fine-scale projects or private gardens, because if it's in a big public park, some regimes cannot be replied. It's very detailed. We've concluded the main management regimes and how they are affecting bees in this form. For mowing during the growing season, mowing can be harmful to bees, but limited mowing can be also beneficial to them by rejuvenating wildflower populations and keep woody plants from invading. So the timing of mowing can be important. The second one is irrigation. Water is essential for bees. Clean and safe water resources needs to be used when irrigating plants. Pruning can increase bloom, and some stems are used as nesting sites. Pruning with the right timing is also important. And be careful when pruning branches with hollows because there might be some bees nesting in the hollows. Um, The use of herbicides can reduce habitat quality by removing floral resources and hosting plants, which may directly toxic to some pollinators. So when we use herbicides on weeds, we should be careful not to spray them on flowers. And also by doing this, landscape architects need plant identification skills of native plants and invasive weeds. Here's my conclusions. As interdisciplinary studies, landscape architecture provide a systematic angle in maintaining bee richness in urban environment. From its three pillars, planning, design, and management, some of the approaches in management are more applicable in fine-scale gardens, such as streetscapes and private gardens. Botanic gardens are designed institutional urban green spaces with conservation, recreation, and education functions. Conservation and research are the two main roles of botanic gardens from the 21st century. Creating a bee-friendly garden in botanic gardens also need to consider its educational, artistic, and research functions. That's all for my research today. Here's a list of references for the text, and here's the acknowledgement. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation today.